Hey everyone, I'm Shannon, and this is my digital story entitled There is No Ethical Computation Under Imperialism. So, what does this phrase even mean? I took this phrase from the original, There's No Ethical Consumption Under Capitalism, a phrase which I think is like very often misused, but originally stemmed in the mid 2010s um, from a critique of the burden placed on exploited consumers and exploited workers to shop ethically under systems where there is no way to do that because the system is inherently unethical. So even quote unquote more ethical purchase choices, which inevitably are more expensive, are not actually ethical because of the nature of capitalism. And so when I adopted this phrase and uh, adjusted it into there's no ethical computation under imperialism. I did this because I want to get to the systemic roots of injustice. We have talked a lot in this course about ethics, about building more just systems, and to me, so long as our technology systems operate within an imperialist system, there is no way to have ethical um, technologies or ethical technological systems because of the systemic roots of injustice under imperialism. Um, I use the concept of imperialism as the highest and most violent form of capitalism, which is like a Leninist idea that sees uh, imperialism as the forcible or coerced extraction on a global scale that is a natural outcome of a global capitalism. And imperialism is not only right the highest sort of end stage of capitalism on a global scale, but it is also the most violent. So much of the global violence we see today stems from this imperialist system. And then finally, I'm doing this because I think that we all have responsibility to act as citizens. If whoever is watching this is a citizen of the United States, the EU, or other nations who benefit from and practice imperialism, um, we have a responsibility. Recently, I was at a talk. I live in Ireland currently. I was at a talk recently where the speaker was going over the history of Irish activists who had been arrested at Shannon Airport, which during the Iraq War, so of 2000 in 2003 during the Iraq War, Irish activists had been arrested because they were trying to stop U.S. warplanes from using Irish airports to transfer weapons. And one of the activists who had been arrested, her case that she pleaded to the judge, she said, I had a responsibility. I saw myself as having a responsibility, and I understood my responsibility to be what is my ability to respond? How am I able? What capacity do I have to respond to the systems that I'm implicated in? So that's sort of the framing logic of why I'm talking about this. Okay, so some like theoretical background, the sort of background that I came into this project with from my own personal previous readings, my previous studies, my like academic background, and my like own interests. Mostly my theoretical background is rooted in like historical post-colonial theories, so like Franz Fanon, this kind of stuff, Aimé Césaire, um, among many others, and also especially post-colonial feminist theory. This is what I had actually focused on in my undergraduate degree, and I am really quite interested in that. And also, of course, contemporary structural critiques, things that we've been talking about in this course and these concepts. Also, I have read a few interesting books like Systems Ultra by Georgina Voss is really interesting. This is really talking about like systems and technological systems, and then The Eye of the Master um, and Code Dependent. These two books specifically look at AI and the systems that AI are involved in and are structural cheeks of those. And some key concepts for me um, in understanding my project were the concept of the one-third world and two-thirds world. This is something I first came across in the work of Chandra Mohanty, and the way that she describes it is that there are those who exploit and those who are exploited. And of course, these are not black and white categories whatsoever, but um, those who are doing the majority of the exploiting and those who are doing or who are being exploited from majorly. And this defies like distinct geographic boundaries. So this is her response to terms like the global south or the first world and third world, because like these types of exploitation are not necessarily geographically bound. So people within the US are exploited in many of the same ways that people in a colonized country might be, depending on their identity and their position. Um, Another very important theoretical concept for me is the imperial boomerang. So this was first proposed by Aimé Césaire back in the 1950s, but it's still extremely relevant today. And Aimé Césaire explains that he's from Martinique, and he explains that what imperialists do and what colonizers do onto others will eventually be done onto those within the sort of imperial core. And so if we think about something like Shoshana Zuboff's surveillance capitalism, like I see that as the imperial boomerang, right? That is um, the chickens coming home to roost of citizens of, the imperial core. And both of these concepts do like harken back to Lenin's critique of imperialism. Lenin says that imperialism will ultimately cause stagnation and decay within the imperial core and will eventually affect citizens within the imperial core. Um, and of course, like ecosystems of technology. This is something that like for me was new in this course and was really interesting and fit really well into my understanding and really broadened my understanding of uh, how socio-technical systems like are affected by imperialism and vice versa. And of course, like which I'll get to later, the concept of imagination, which sounds like a very basic idea, but I think is the most important thing for looking towards the future. One important note that I have is that it's really hard to find thorough critiques of the imperial system within published academic scholarship and literature because academic institutions are themselves implicated within the system of imperialism. I think we can, without naming specifics, look around at many of the events of late recent events and see how academic institutions are heavily invested in maintaining a violent imperialist order. And so it can be kind of hard to, within that space, find true and genuine critiques of imperialism. Hard to come by that type of scholarship, but certainly, I have done my best. Okay, so then moving on, I wanted to take that theoretical background, those theoretical concepts, and look at a few key examples in the real world happening right now where we can see imperialism impacting our socio-technical ecosystems. So I've done this on like 3 layers. The first layer we can look at is the actual physical raw material extraction. So the physical materials to build our socio-technical world and to power those technologies. So we can look at, of course, the Congo, I think is most infamous for this, where cobalt mining has led to really horrific conditions of slavery, child slavery, mass sexual violence, and just horrific violent exploitation. in order to extract, especially cobalt. Another really interesting and important example is Kanaki, or New Caledonia, which was originally annexed by France in the 1850s, still is controlled by France today, occupied by France today, and has, like, I believe, a fifth of the entire world's nickel reserves. Nickel is a very important material for building batteries. So the batteries that we needed to power both electric vehicles and also, like, large scale solar power storage. And so recently, France has been cracking down on control of Kanaki and has been sort of attempting to, like, bring more French settlers onto the island, or give the French settlers on the island more power, which has led to backlash and resistance from the indigenous people. And, like, that's what this picture is here. These are French authorities in Kanaki, New Caledonia, after an uprising there. Um, and one very telling example that I found was a US lawsuit where people who had survived the labor conditions in Congo actually attempted to sue uh, five US tech companies: Apple, Alphabet, which is Google's parent company, Microsoft, Dell, and Tesla. And these five companies, um, basically, they got off. The US court ruled that they were not liable for the damage that had been done, because they had outsourced, of course, to third-party contractors to obtain these materials. So that kind of obfuscated their guilt. It insulated them. However, the court ruled that this did happen. Slave labor, forced labor, extreme violence did occur at these mining sites, where the products ultimately ended up in the hands of these five companies. However, because there was a third party contractor insulating the companies in between, they were not held liable. And so you can see from the fact that these are the five of the largest tech companies within the US. This is systemic. It is everywhere. Our materials, our technologies are being powered by modern day slavery. That is just the reality. And this is what the court case found, and yet still um, the companies were not held liable. Okay, so the second example I wanted to look at on a different level was the human labor that goes into powering, especially AI systems. Um, the sites of where most of this is happening is Kenya and other East African nations, the Philippines and India, and this mirrors, like, colonial history, right? So these are the, like, neo-colonial labor exploitation. This is what that's what this is. So there's a fantastic book about this, Feeding the Machine, that I recently read, and it really digs in deep to this labor exploitation that and its colonial roots. Um, and so what they explain, and this is something also that Ruha Benjamin talked about that we read in our course, is these systems seem frictionless, right? They seem autonomous, but behind the scenes, the vast majority, up to 80% of the work being done, driving AI systems, is actually done by annotators in the two-thirds world, or in the exploited world. Um, so, like, data annotators who are working in, like, really exploitative conditions are powering most of these systems, because, like, we don't have, like, there needs to be someone doing the data annotation, and of course many companies are outsourcing that labor to areas where they can exploit workers without end users being aware of that exploitation happening. Um, and yeah, like I said, like, these labor supply chains, they absolutely follow the colonial roots that they were born out of. Furthermore, not only is it data annotators, but it's also content moderation. And content moderation is such a huge issue because the psychological toll that content moderation takes on workers is really horrific. It is um, very psychologically damaging work, and most of the people doing that work are in the two-thirds world, or in sort of neo-colonial locations. And actually, Feeding the Machine starts off with a story from the authors. The three authors, by the way, are professors at University of Essex and Oxford, and they went around the globe looking at these centers of both data annotation and content moderation. And they start off their book talking about a young woman who lived in the largest slum in Africa, in Nairobi, Kenya, and worked for a content moderation center that was run for Meta. And one day she essentially, one of the videos that comes up for her to moderate or to decide if it's like within the terms of service is a video of a man being killed in a car accident. She realizes the man is her grandfather, um, and she then proceeds to receive more and more videos from the accident, from the fatal accident. She's the first person in her family, obviously, to find out about this. She's seeing it in real time as it's being uploaded or streamed. Um, and she's basically told by her supervisor that if she leaves, if she stops working, that she's endangering her job, her position at the company, which she is not in a financial position to do. And this is just one extreme example, although they say it's very common, of the type of exploitation and complete like emotional psychological degradation that workers are subject to. Of course, she was working for Meta. She was doing content moderation for Meta. However, Meta is again contracting out to a third party, which insulates them from risk and insulates them from critique. Meta can say, oh, we don't know anything about this. This is our third party. That's their problem. They will make sure that they're doing the right thing, but there's no one actually checking or holding Meta accountable. And if you think about the sheer volume of content that is being uploaded to these sites like Meta, YouTube, which is owned by Google, and others, there is no way to do content moderation without extreme labor exploitation because of the sheer volume. There is no way to do it ethically. Um, and finally, one more point that they get into in this book and in general is a very important point is the environmental catastrophe that sort of big data or this explosion in data powered technology is having. Just like as one example of that, again, I live in Ireland. In Ireland now, currently data centers, Ireland has a ton of data centers because we're like a tax haven for global corporations, unfortunately. Data centers take up currently about 20% of our total energy usage in Ireland. By 2027, this is projected to rise to 30%. And so there's currently a debate within the Irish government on whether to put a moratorium totally on building data centers because the massive amounts of energy that they consume. And currently there is no like green technology to run these data centers. And even if there is, if we go back to the example of what's happening in Kanaki, you can see that even if there are green technologies, even if we run these data centers on solar power, that solar power is being powered itself by materials that are forcibly and violently extracted through imperialism and direct colonization. So again, this is the title of my project. There is no ethical computation under imperialism. You cannot have green technologies that are ethical when those materials are being stolen through colonization. Finally, the final layer that I wanted to get into is Palestine, US-Mexico border, and Fortress Europe. How are these three sites connected, and what does that have to do like with us? So the tools of coercive control that are used to uphold surveillance and security at the US-Mexico border, as well as within Fortress Europe, which is a topic that Harsha Walia explains really well in Border and Rule, the concept of Fortress Europe. These technologies largely are developed by Israel through testing on uh, Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank, testing on them, um, testing on them with no consent. Obviously, they do not get consent from the Palestinians who they surveil heavily, who they exploit, and who they coercively control. This is the main topic of Antony Lowenstein's The Palestine Laboratory. This was actually the book that I did my book review on, and he goes into the ways that Israel markets these technologies, both tools of war and weapons and tools of surveillance. Both of these are marketed as field tested, and obviously that field testing is being done on Palestinians within the occupied territories that Israel controls and enacts force over. And Palestinians have to pay the price for that. They have no choice on whether they want to be test subjects within this laboratory. And Lowenstein frames this within the system of global imperialism. So not only, right, as I said, not only is it tools of surveillance, but of course it's tools of warfare. And when we get into the most like disturbing and dystopian examples of AI being used in warfare, like we can see now, we have credible reports of um, AI systems or like algorithmic systems choosing not only kill targets within Gaza, but locating them and then drones executing anyone within the surrounding vicinity, all autonomously. This level of inhuman warfare is absolutely something that like we haven't seen being practiced in the real world before. This is like a new front. Um, and it it is something that we all need to reckon with, that we now live in a world where we are letting algorithms decide who should be killed, where, when, and then autonomously doing the killing. That's the world we live in. And not only is that the world we live in, but um, it is our companies that are powering it. So workers at workers at Google and Amazon have started an initiative called No Tech for Apartheid, and this is where the workers of these companies are coming together and making it clear to the public that Google and Amazon are both powering the data systems that are doing this type of autonomous killing and extreme surveillance, and that they should be held accountable for that. Um, Another really interesting example that I found of these sort of like intersections where our systems and our governments are implicated is in this really disturbing reality of a Canadian um, ecological ecotech initiative where the Canadian government announced it would be using this drone program to monitor pollution levels and I think ice loss levels in the Arctic, and like they can do this to help protect the environment and all this great ecological stuff. However, the drones that they are using are the same drones that are currently mass killing civilians in Gaza. They're just repurposed, sold to the Canadian government as this nice, lovely, friendly technology, but the roots of that technology are incredibly violent, and so there's no way to sort of wash that out of the technology, out of the system. Okay, so like where do we go from here? Right? This is um, a lot. It's a lot, of course. However, uh, the first thing, step one, is to recognize our place within these systems and our abilities to respond. Right, going back to like the beginning, the activists at Shannon Airport trying to stop U.S. warplanes on their way to Iraq. Um, what are our abilities to respond? And we all have our own capacities, right? We all have to have those frank conversations with ourselves about, are we responding? In what ways are we responding? And what capacities do we have to respond? What are our roles within the system? And a really important aspect of that is unlearning imperialism. So this book, it's a pretty thick one. However, incredibly important work. It's called Potential History: Unlearning Imperialism by Ariella Aisha Azoulay. Azoulay, she is actually like a visual culture critic. However, she describes herself as having grown up within a settler colony in occupied Palestine, and she writes about having to unlearn her imperialist identity, having to unlearn all of the things that imperialism taught her, and all of the ways that, and learning to see all of the ways that imperialism shaped the things around her and shaped, the global system. Um, Unpacking that is like step number one. Another great book about this is Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Abolition Geography. She also writes about this. Um, and this semester we read and watched some videos from Ruha Benjamin. Her work is incredibly inspiring to me because not only does she talk about possible futures, but she's really like rooted in radical hope and imagination as the tool for liberation. That we have to have imagination. We have to imagine systems better than this. Of course, this is not new. I have this quote here from Thomas Sankara. Back in 1985, Thomas Sankara was like the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, and his speeches are like very, clear and concise critiques of imperialism as someone who suffered from it and then directly rose up against it. So I wanted to end with that because I think it is, it gives a lot to think about. So Sankara says, you cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from nonconformity, the courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. It took the madmen of yesterday for us to be able to act with extreme clarity today. I want to be one of these madmen. We must dare to invent the future. So again, 1985, this is Thomas Sankara saying we must dare to invent the future, and that starts with unpacking and unlearning imperialism and critiquing the ways that it affects all of our systems, including our socio-technical systems. And that was what I tried to look at this semester. That was the main focus of my work.